It was the spring of 2017. I was flying out to Chicago for a job interview. It was around 11 p.m. and I was sitting in my gate at the San Francisco International Airport. A storm was raging outside, rain pouring down the windows as everyone was bundled up on the seats and keeping to themselves. I was just scanning the rows of people in seats sleeping on laptops or phones and wearing earbuds before I noticed this one guy. He was sitting in the farthest corner of the gate by the corridor, with no one else sitting around him. He was not on his phone or wearing headphones like everyone else. He has this huge, crooked grin plastered on his face, and he's staring directly at me. He looked pretty average in terms of looks and what he was wearing, but that grin was so creepy, it was beginning to make me shit bricks. Naturally, I turned away and pretended I hadn't seen him, but the fact that he was staring at me made me continuously turn to eye him back without realizing. Eventually, they called our gate and I boarded the plane. I took my seat in the business class right by the window and went on my phone, checking Instagram and texting friends. I did not see the creepy man boarding. An hour later, we were up in the sky. Sometime through the flight, I got up to use the bathroom, and as I was finishing up in there, someone knocked on the door. I called out, "Occupied," but the person continued knocking repeatedly and aggressively. As I was washing my hands, I ignored it, hoping it would go away, but it didn't. So I opened the door to make some ballsy remark, but froze when I saw who was in front of me. It was that guy from the airport, still with that creepy grin plastered on his face. Quickly, I pushed past him and walked to my seat, not glancing behind me. The rest of my flight went normal except for the fact that I couldn't get him off my mind. As soon as we landed in Chicago, I was the first to get my suitcase down from the overhead luggage, and the first off of that airplane. I called an Uber as I walked to the airport parking lot. It was 12 p.m. in Chicago. The Uber came and I drove to my hotel. And as I checked into my room, I realized something horrible. My wallet was missing. I don't know where I could have left it, so I called the airport and asked them to search the plane. They did so and got back to me a few hours later saying they found nothing. I drove back to the airport and spent the whole rest of the day searching and turning up nothing. My only theories were I had somehow left it at San Francisco or it had been stolen. I was able to recover and spent 3 more days walletless in Chicago. But you know what? Here's the scary part. When I got back to San Francisco and drove to my house, I discovered something disturbing. My door was unlocked, and my entire house was trashed. Everything had been broken, and anything worth a slight amount of value had been taken. I checked my security footage and was able to identify the intruder as the grinning man from the airport who, sure enough, had my wallet and therefore my keys. I called the police, who found his fingerprints all over my house. The only scary thing was that the prints did not match anyone on record.
Hello, my name is Sam. The story I'm about to share with you is a true story that happened in my old neighborhood. I was in elementary school with my 2 sisters. Mary was 13 and the oldest. I was 11 and the middle child, and my little sister Emily was 8. One day at school, I witnessed a little girl being forced into a blue vehicle. She was crying, but the man forced her in was trying to shut her up. That day, we had an indoor recess, and it had something to do with the blue vehicle and a missing student. The teachers locked the school entrance and warned the class to look out for a blue car. Every morning, we would catch the bus at 7:15, and I would always look out for an adventure. So I would always pay attention to everything that happened. One day, we were waiting by the bus stop as usual when I spotted it. Across the street sat a man inside a blue car. He had black hair and sunglasses. His windows were always open and we could see inside the car easily. It looked like he had pink seats and cute puppies with toys. It was strange, especially because he was only staring at us. We were the only people who were at the bus stop, so it wasn't like he was watching his kid or anything. I didn't say anything at first, but then I started seeing him regularly. I pointed him out to my older sister, Mary, joking that he was stalking us and he probably wanted to kidnap someone. We all started laughing, but then, realizing the situation, we got scared. Eventually the bus came and we all sat in the back. As the bus was moving, I turned around to stare at the window, and to my horror, the blue car was following us. I screamed and informed everyone about the man that was following us. At that point, everyone was crowded at the back, trying to have a glimpse of the man. The bus driver told us to sit down. It was probably nothing, but she looked scared. Realizing he was spotted, the blue car turned at a corner and disappeared. We all calmed down, but 2 minutes later he showed up again, and we all noticed. After that incident, we stopped seeing the man, but we still experienced weird things. Like one time, my cousin and I were playing in the backyard. We had a gate at the back that opened to the alley and led out to the bus stop. At one point, one of my cousins opened the gate. We began playing tag in the alley when a small white puppy began running towards us. It was very similar to the puppies in the blue car. We fed it some chicken, but as I was feeding it, it tried to bite me. We realized that this puppy was very aggressive and rough. We also noticed that the puppy had a blue mark painted on it. Before, we didn't pay it any mind, but the more I think about it, the more I realized it must have belonged to some sort of gang. My mom told us to stop playing in the alley and stay close. After that, the puppy disappeared. We forgot about the situation until now. Emily told me when the puppy disappeared, she heard a loud whistle and the dog began running to a man dressed in black and who stood on the corner. Was the puppy the same puppy from the blue car? Was he using the puppy as bait to kidnap us? And sometimes I wonder what would have happened if we ended up following the puppy to...
I grew up in what people would consider a bad household. My mom and dad were in a bad relationship, and they did nothing but argue every day. My mom would complain that my dad would stick in the basement almost every day and never spend any time with me. And my dad would always have the same response, that he's doing research down there. The only problem was that we were prohibited from going down to the basement. 3 locks were built into the basement door, and he kept his one key on his old key ring. The key had a torn blue sticker at the bottom of it with a brown rusty tip. However, my mom finally got a hold of it somehow. And that same day when I came home from school, Dad suddenly told me she left us for another man. He seemed truly broken and sunk in his misery. So I tried pretending to be normal at first. But I couldn't stop crying like a baby when I finally got back in my room. After a few months of emotional breakdowns, my dad finally got over it. Furthermore, he started to visit the basement more consistently to the point where I would feel like I lived alone. I kept thinking my dad was working very hard, since I saw him being very distraught after coming upstairs from the basement. I thought everything was fine, until I started hearing noises at night. They weren't just regular noises. It was kind of someone's crying and scream of agony. But the most disturbing sound of all was the sound of growling, like some kind of beast would exist down in the basement. The next morning I complained to my dad, but he acted like he had no idea what I was talking about as he walked past me to get ready for work. So I just shook it off, assuming that he was watching some horror movie down there, or if I was just imagining the whole thing. I went back to my room. As it was the weekend, I was ready to catch up on some Saturday morning cartoons. I turned on my TV, and as I got ready to change the channel, I heard a familiar name. The news reporter was naming over 40 missing people in our town, and my mom was one of those names as they briefly showed her picture and information. I was confused about who would file a missing person report for her, because my grandparents both died in a tragic car accident years ago. She had no siblings, and my dad told me she left us for another man. I wanted to inform my dad, but soon I was concerned it would make him depressed again. And in a way, I was still angry at her for leaving us. So I ignored it and changed the channel. A few minutes later, my dad came in to tell me he was leaving for work. He gave me a kiss on my forehead and informed me that he'd be back later that night. After he left, I invited my best friend Austin to come over. He then arrived shortly after, and we played a game on my PlayStation. As we were about to plunge into the game, we suddenly heard a strange noise coming from the basement. "What was that?" Austin asked, being confused. "I don't know. My dad does some kinds of experiments down there. It's probably a rat or something." Austin looked amused. "No, dude, we can't go down there. My dad said so," I said quickly, bringing an end to Austin's excitement. It has no reason to doubt that Austin was disappointed. Then he asked for something to drink, so I went to the kitchen to get some juice for him. However, I was hit with a foul odor of something rotting as soon as I arrived in the kitchen. I looked around to see what could be the cause of the smell, and I found that the basement door was cracked open. I went to close it, but the curiosity got the best of me. So I called Austin to help me investigate. We darted down the stairs to the basement, clenching our noses at that horrible smell. It was dark until Austin found a light switch and quickly flicked it on. However, we had to regret our decision instantly after we saw the inside of the basement. There were people hanging from hooks with random limbs missing. As we were standing in horror, Austin clenched my shirt strongly. I could see the piles of feces and human remains contained within certain sections of the room. But the most disturbing and disgusting sight of all was the cage in the dark right corner of the room. The inside of it seemed to be a person sleeping at first, but as it looked up, I quickly realized that thing was not a person. What is that?" Austin shouted, shaking with fear. I ignored his question. To be more specific, I couldn't answer. That thing was indescribably frightening. It looked like a deformed human with its mouth filled with crooked and ragged teeth covering a majority of its face. Its face pointed outward with creases where the nose should be. The eyes were bulging out of its head as it fixated its glance toward Austin and me. "Food," it said to us slowly with excitement and a malicious voice. Then it started clawing at the iron bars of the cage with its needle-like hands. I sat there in horror until Austin grabbed my wrist. We ran up the stairs scrambling for the escape and shut the door. After I made sure it was perfectly locked, I saw Austin sitting on the carpet floor with his knees to his chest. Once we had a few moments of silence, I then finally realized what really happened to my mom and those missing people in our town. At that instant, Austin muttered like this: "Your dad, he was feeding those people to that thing. Now, what should I do now?"